Peter Strzok wasn't the only person President Trump tweeted about Monday. Former White House advisor Omarosa Newman released another conversation she secretly recorded. On the audio, Mr. Trump expresses surprise over her firing. Nicole Killian is at the White House with the president's reaction.
There's a lot of very corrupt things that are happening in the White House.
Former advisor to the president, Omarosa Newman, appeared on NBC's Today Show Monday, where she released an audio conversation between her and President Trump.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw on the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
No, nobody even told me about it. Nobody.
Wow.
You know, they run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
God damn it. I don't love you leaving at all.
The former Apprentice star, once one of the president's staunchest allies, says the recording brings up a major concern.
Who's running this country? When Donald Trump says that they run a big operation, who is the they? Is General Kelly puppeting Donald Trump?
Okay.
Is he truly running this country?
The recording comes ahead of her new memoir, Unhinged, and follows another secret recording she released. This one with Chief of Staff John Kelly firing her in the super secure White House Situation Room.
Is the president aware of this?
Let's not go down the road. This is a non-negotiable discussion. This has to do with some pretty serious integrity violations.
The president is firing back with some harsh words for his former advisor, whom he's known for 15 years.
Lowlife. She's a lowlife.
Over the weekend, he called her a lowlife, and in a tweet Monday, the president called her wacky and said people in the White House hated her. She was vicious, but not smart. Newman says she recorded the conversations to protect her credibility. Nicole Killian, CBS News, the White House.
Well, the president also tweeted that his chief of staff told him Omarosa was, quote, a loser and nothing but problems. Mr. Trump also said he told General Kelly to try working it out if possible because she only said great things about me until she got fired. President Trump is the one who brought Omarosa onto her West Wing job. White House records show she earned an annual salary of nearly $180,000. That's the highest possible amount for an executive branch employee. Zeke Miller is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Molly Hooper is a CBSN political contributor and Capitol Hill reporter for The Hill. They join me now from Washington. All right, let's talk about this latest episode here of the Donald Trump show. Zeke, Omarosa says that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly fired her in the Situation Room. How typical is that for a personnel meeting, a personnel event like that to take place in the sit room?
Well, White House officials aren't necessarily confirming that factoid right there, but either way, it's highly unusual for firing or any personnel decision matter of that sort to take place in the Situation Room, and certainly even more unusual for there to be a recording of it, an apparent recording of that Omarosa has now tweeted. I mean, that's the sort of conduct that you hear Chief of Staff Kelly talking about, is sort of ethical questions that have come up that have led to his decision to fire her. Taping a conversation in the Situation Room or in the West Wing is precisely that sort of thing. That is a fireable offense in any administration. The question is why in this one was it tolerated for so long?
And Zeke, I'm just curious, in your job there covering the White House, did you have any dealings with Omarosa? Was she someone that you would regularly talk to as an administration official, as reporters do from time to time, to get a better sense of the president's thinking?
You certainly tried. You know, the interesting thing about Omarosa, she was always around the West Wing. She was sort of just floating around in meetings and offices, and you'd see her outside the press secretary's office, just coming in meetings where she basically had nothing, no stake in. It was not an issue that she had anything to do with. That was a meeting between the press secretary and various members of the press staff and reporters. It was not something within her portfolio. And talking to White House officials, that's something that she did in the Oval Office early on in particular, and in other policy meetings and otherwise. She was always around. She didn't always offer very much to contribute to those conversations, at least in my personal experience. But she was in an awful lot of meetings, and it wasn't really clear what she did.
Interesting. Well, Molly, Congress is still on recess, but have any lawmakers reacted to the recordings Omarosa has released?
Well, I haven't seen any specific reactions to those recordings. However, I anticipate seeing some kind of legislation dealing with this whole idea of members of the White House signing non-disclosure agreements. I anticipate Democrats will come up with bills to make that illegal, given that these people do work for the federal government, and I can understand an NDA in a private organization, that makes sense. But when it comes to the federal government, it seems a little touch and go there, and it's something that the Democrats could seize on.
Yeah, I want to get into that a little bit more. But Zeke, remind us. You say that Omarosa was frequently around in these various meetings, but what was her actual White House job? What was her portfolio? And remind us why she was fired.
So her official title was Director of Communications for the Office of Public Liaison, which is sort of interesting because the White House for so much of that period didn't have a Director of Communications per se, or was co-located with the press secretary.
Right.
It was really a title for an office that didn't really exist, a liaison that didn't. There's really no outreach that really took place that she was a part of. She did have the status of being the highest profile African American in the Trump administration, and that was in an administration that has certainly fallen behind previous administrations of both parties. Their benchmarks for diversity was an important thing that the Trump administration sort of held her in the senior staff for. But she didn't really have a clear portfolio, didn't really have any clear impact on any policy discussions. And you could really, when she left after a year, say she did X or Y. You'd ask White House officials, members of the press, observers, lawmakers of Capitol Hill, what did Omarosa do in a year? They'd be hard pressed to come up with an answer. That's kind of a really striking thing, how somebody can stay in the administration for so long and that be the case. That's one of the reasons why she was fired, but also whether it was because they knew about the tapes or they knew about her conduct, some other conduct that officials have been talking about, that's why she was let go.
And Zeke, let me go back to this NDA that Molly mentioned there could be potentially legislation coming forward on. The president tweeted also that his former aide had a, quote, fully signed non-disclosure agreement. Do we know, Zeke, specifically what he's referring to there?
We do not. White House officials have been sort of touch and go, and not entirely consistent on whether the White House requires signing an NDA. And even if there was a non-disclosure agreement for working in the West Wing, it's an open question whether that would be legally enforceable. We do know that Trump campaign officials, both before and now, before the president won in 2016 and now, and then his re-election campaign, are required to sign non-disclosure agreements. That's normal in campaigns. It's normal in private enterprise. But it's not clear just, in any case, in any non-disclosure agreement, in any non-disparagement agreement, we talk to any attorney, they'll say they're often very hard to enforce, as the president is now discovering now with Omarosa, but also when it comes to Stormy Daniels and others. These things, it's very easy for the cat to get. Once cat's out of the bag, it's very hard to put it back in.
Right. It would seem that if she had in fact signed something, she is certainly not adhering to any of the terms that might have been contained within. Well, the president ended his working vacation and traveled to New York State Monday. He signed a defense bill named after Senator John McCain and criticized the media in a speech at Fort Drum. What was interesting, Molly, the president did not talk about New York Congressman Chris Collins, who was arrested last week. Collins suspended his re-election campaign over the weekend. Did Democrats, Molly, think they have a chance of snagging his seat in November?
I laugh because at this point it seems like anything's possible, especially given, prognostications that the Democrats could pick up possibly the House, if not become 50-50. This sort of reminds me of 2006, back when President Bush was in his second term in the White House and it was the midterm elections. And Republicans lost control of the House and the Senate, and it sort of started out with this trickle of, unrelated ethics investigations and Republicans. I mean, we had Bob Ney, the Jack Abramoff scandal was going on, and this is one matter. Chris Collins getting indicted. This is one matter that could set off who knows what other possible ethics violations. In addition to which, it's just one of those years that Democrats feel like they do have a chance in these elections, and I think it's a matter of where they're actually going to deploy their resources. Which I've talked to a few Democratic lawmakers behind the scenes. They're kind of concerned about, because they do want to play in a lot of these races where they didn't think they would play beforehand, but they didn't have the investment up front in money. So we'll see.
Well, so Congressman Collins was the first member of Congress to endorse Donald Trump. Zeke, do you think that we're going to hear from the White House about this?
I think it's highly unlikely unless they're pressed on it. Certainly the next time Sarah Sanders or somebody else from the White House holds a press briefing or gaggle, they will be asked about that instance, and they'll, I'm sure, have some sort of canned response. But it's highly unlikely this is one of those areas where the president is trying to keep his distance from somebody who he once kept close. And it sort of fits a pattern we have seen often from a president who has said he'd surround himself with the best people. Oftentimes those people, not turning out to be just that. The president says he likes to reward loyalty. In this case, he might be rewarding that loyalty with his silence and not condemning a member of his own party for these alleged ethics violations.
All right, we'll see if the White House has a response. So let's zoom out a bit here, Molly. 4 states are holding primaries Tuesday. Are there any races that you'll be watching in particular?
I'm still watching Ohio.
Yeah, right.
But really, I mean, to figure out what's going on in that race. But in terms of the races this week, actually, what I'm focusing on, since the Senate's back in session this week, I'm actually focusing my sights on what's happening up on Capitol Hill in terms of Brett Kavanaugh meeting with various members of the Senate, the Democrats who had not decided to meet with him until Democratic leadership in the Senate said, okay, you can meet with him. So he's meeting with Brett Kavanaugh, this is the Supreme Court nominee, is meeting with Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, up for re-election, and Joe Donnelly. Next week he's going to be meeting with Claire McCaskill. So really, I'm covering what's going on up there on Capitol Hill these days, and that in August of all times is what's happening.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting to see what comes out of those meetings, especially because, as you note, these Democrats had not originally agreed to meet with him. Well, Zeke, are there any states or races that you think the White House has its eye on Tuesday in those primaries?
They're certainly keeping an eye a little bit on Wisconsin, where the impacts of the president's trade policy are essentially on the ballot this November. It's kind of is a purple state, one the president carried, one with a Republican governor who survived a recall and won a re-election, now faces his 3rd term. It's a prime Republican pickup opportunity in the Senate this fall. So a lot could happen in both cases. Really, it's one of those interesting things about why tomorrow is so interesting from a primary perspective, not so much from the White House perspective, is that on both sides there are these very expensive primaries for the Democratic side for governor, the Republican side for Senate, that could impact their pickup opportunities come November, where it's possible that both parties here are shooting themselves in the foot. But certainly that's one the White House is keeping an eye on, with the Harley-Davidson being a job creator in the state, also one of some of the president's allies on the ballot there.
Right, and President Trump traveled there to Wisconsin to tout that Foxconn plant that was opening, right? So we'll be watching Wisconsin closely, as well as the other states. Zeke Miller and Molly Hooper in Washington, my thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.